Welcome. Shadow work has become a very popular topic, especially in metaphysical and magical communities recently. And while this introspective work can be a very long, some might even say a lifetime process, its benefits far make up for the time that it takes to conduct the work. So, from amplifying your spiritual gifts to finding more ease in your relationships, shadow work is a soul changing process. And those who engage in it regularly are often shocked by how much better life becomes. We'll be talking about all of this and more in tonight's episode. And I'll also be sharing some of my favorite shadow work and energy work tips. So, merry meet. Welcome, everyone. I'm Aislin. This is Ask Aislin. So if you are here with me live, hi, feel free to leave comments and questions in the chat so that I can answer those at the end. And if you are joining me afterwards, you can always feel free to leave those questions there, and I go back through the feed later and I answer everybody's questions that I didn't address in the video. And also, if you like what you hear, leave a heart or a thumbs up at some point during the video, and that just helps us get this into the feed of more people. All right, so let's dive right in. There's a lot to talk about tonight. For those who are new to shadow work, feel free to check out some of my other videos. I have a full-length class called Introduction to Shadow Work, and I will drop the link below so you can access that. Also, feel free to go onto our Body, Mind, Witchcraft YouTube channel, and there are a lot of free videos on there sharing other shadow work tips and telling you more about shadow work. So, briefly, for those who are new, shadow work is deep internal work that allows its practitioners to uncover hidden aspects of themselves. So, things that are buried down in the unconscious. And we call these shadow aspects. So, keeping these rejected parts of ourselves under the surface or at bay takes a lot of energy from us, a tremendous amount of energy. And this is why those who engage in shadow work as a regular process will often discover that there's this amplification of their spiritual or their intuitive or magical gifts, even if they did nothing else besides shadow work. So, even if they were not working on those things, they still see this change because of the shadow work. So some just simply feel that life gets easier, life gets better when they do their shadow work. Really, probably what's going on is that it just becomes easier to deal with life. We're not as triggered by things. We find an ease in things that had once upset us greatly. Regardless of what the cause of this is, life just simply gets better for most people who engage in shadow work on a regular basis. So I'm going to be sharing 6 different shadow work tips tonight. These are different ones than I've shared in other videos, so you are in for some new information tonight, and some of this will probably be repeating as well for those who have watched some of the other videos. But let us just dive right in. And again, as I said, if you're looking for more basic information about shadow work, feel free to check out any of our videos on the Body, Mind, Witchcraft YouTube channel. Okay, so tip number 1. So this is something that I do get asked a lot, and so I wanted to address this here. There is no workaround and no replacement for shadow work. So I get asked about this frequently, if there is something else that people can do. And in my opinion, there really isn't. I mean, there's going to be a yes and no to this question. Because basically, I have seen people doing what I would consider shadow work, but calling it something different. So you don't necessarily need to engage in shadow work in order to do soul searching and introspective work. Shadow work is one method of doing it. But what the problem is with thinking about replacing it is that you need to find something that will allow you to go in and deeply investigate your life and all of the things that are going on, triggers, relationships that you have. And so while we can use certain tools to help complement the process, there really isn't a tool that can replace that kind of work. and that will get us that deep into the psyche. So, for example, there are a lot of crystals that you can use to utilize during your shadow work that will actually help you amplify the process. So, for example, obsidian and onyx are two really good go-tos. I think that black tourmaline, labradorite, this is not an exhaustive list, but all of these crystals can very much help you clear out some of the negative blockages or the negative energy that you have. And what you might find is that when you use these tools, it will trigger a shadow work session, which I will explain a little bit more about later what a shadow work session would look like. But it might trigger the session, but you still have to do the work. So we can't expect the stone to do all the work for us. It simply helps us get to the place where we're able to do the work. So there are a lot of things on the market that are being sold. Like, as I said, shadow work is a very popular topic right now. And so recently at a metaphysical fair, I got this shadow work oil by a woman who makes various different oils, and she had a shadow work one. And so I purchased it. It's a lovely oil, but it isn't meant to replace shadow work. So just putting it on isn't going to do my shadow work, but putting it on may help me become more receptive to what's in the unconscious, and therefore it's going to amplify my shadow work. So there's, like I said, lots of other things. My friend makes these very lovely candles. This is like a little dark moon candle she makes. So getting tools like this can be very helpful for your process, as long as we realize that they're not going to replace what we're doing. Now, shadow work simply just needs to be done at some point. And the trouble is that many people are not really aware of this, and many people will never engage in it anyway. But the integration of the shadow with the rest of the self is something that needs to take place. So whether that is going to happen here in this world or it's going to happen in between incarnations, it has to happen somewhere. And so some actually believe that that idea of purgatory that is often talked about among Christians is actually this kind of work. So the people who ignored it or were not able to work through these aspects, these blockages, these unconscious things during life, will work through them later. And personally, while I'm here, I'd like to work on mine while I'm here. And I know a lot of people who are interested in shadow work feel the same way. But where those who failed to do any kind of this work, they may realize after death that they are not actually the person that they thought they were. And that's basically what shadow work is when we take that mask off and we realize this persona that we've been showing to the world isn't actually the authentic self. That's somewhere underneath it. And when we integrate that shadow, we can become better able to be who we really are. So that leads me to tip number 2. And again, if you're here live, feel free to leave some comments. I'm periodically looking at the feed, and I'm going to answer anybody's questions at the end as well. So tip number 2, this is also one that I get asked a lot. Shadow work is not just dark witchcraft. So let me explain the reasoning here. So like I said, I get asked this a lot because it is a very common misconception. So it comes from 2 different places. So there are some witches who think that this is simply the darker side of the craft. And then sometimes they're a little thrown off when they realize that it's not quite what they expected. So yes and no, this is a darker side of the craft, but let's explain what that means. So it really depends on what you use to define the word dark. So the patriarchy sought to crush the divine feminine, and this is well documented through periods of history. Those things that relate to the divine feminine, like the goddess worship, intuition, and the unconscious, became evil or negative or regarded as the left-hand path. This is where we hear this left-hand path sometimes. Well, the goddess and the feminine energy is the left side of the body. That's where that whole thing comes from anyway. So that word shadow, it gets thrown in with all of this. And it has this negative connotation in our society for this reason. Part of this has to do with the fact that the collective has not done its shadow work. And so that gets projected out into the world. in stories that make sensational headlines of evil things that have happened, or we see this in movies and in fairy tales. There's that dark, dark, evil aspect out there. Well, really what that is the collective pushing its own shadow out into the public eye. Now, instead of thinking of our shadow as being evil, because we're not working on it, we instead realize, of us who come to shadow work and understand what it is, we realize this is actually a tool for our own self-awareness. To me, this is the pinnacle, the goal of our spiritual evolution, is to get to a place where we can simply say, I know exactly what my higher self is, and I know exactly who I am. But until we do our shadow work, we may think we know who we are. We may think we know what our higher self is, but we're not quite there yet. Now, when we're working with our shadow, it helps us identify that mask that we wear out around us. Near other people, we also realize that other people are also wearing masks. And with this realization, we then become able to become more authentic. So that's it in a nutshell. Obviously, the process, like I explained, is a long process. And like I said, some say a lifetime. But that's it in a nutshell. Just saying hi to Misty. Hi there, Misty. Anybody who's joining us now. So let's talk about tip number 3. This is a startling one to learn, actually. So tip number 3, you can't truly know if someone loves you unless you take off your mask. This is a startling one when I read it too. But so let's think about it. I'm going to say it again and just let it sink in. You can't truly know if someone loves you unless you take off your mask. So let's talk about what this means. So whether we like it or not, as I mentioned, we are all wearing these masks. And we begin to create that mask, that persona that covers up the true self at a very early age. It's based on things that happen to us as children. It's based on the values and the ideas of our caregivers, of our school systems, of our communities and societies around us, of the church, if you were a member of a religious organization. So all of these people and places tell us what's acceptable and what is not acceptable. Now, we don't even realize it because we're so young when all this is happening, but it's creating a mask that we wear in order to fit in. So those urges that we might have inside, or those thoughts that are not acceptable by society, we push them down into the shadow, and then we push them out away from us, and they get projected out into the collective. We interact with others who are also wearing masks. Most everybody's wearing one because most everyone hasn't integrated the shadow yet. And so when we begin waking up to this fact that we're all wearing these masks, it can be really quite earth-shaking. Now, shadow work allows us to see ourselves for who we truly are. However, like any introspective work that you do, this can, and when we begin to change, this can have an effect on those around us. Now, sometimes what it will do is it'll have a positive effect. So other people will see you doing your work. They'll see that you have changed. Sometimes they won't even know why you have changed or how you've changed. They just see that you have changed. Now, some people will use that as an impetus to do their own work. They might ask you, what have you been doing? And you will say shadow work, and they become interested in it. They may ask you about it and may begin exploring it themselves, or something else that leads to that kind of deep integration of the self. Now, other people may become very triggered by your shadow work, just like you may have noticed people in your life becoming triggered by you as you bettered yourself in some ways. There's a lot of reasons for this. I think that the very, very deep one has to do with the fact that people are aware that something's not right, and they're just not really willing to face it. And so when they realize that you or someone around them is doing that kind of work, it can very much trigger them. It can make them feel very defensive. Some are not ready to face their own shadows, and the unfortunate part is that this may cause some people to pull away from us, or on the other flip side of it, it may make it so that you realize that the relationships that you have, certain relationships you have, are not as beneficial as you thought once you start to remove your mask. So our work on ourselves may threaten others. It may threaten their egos, which would very much like for them to keep up the facade that everything's okay. But we really don't truly know who someone is. We don't really truly know if they love us truly until we take off that mask. Until they can really see us for who we truly are. So when we do our shadow work and we begin to take off that mask, that is where we might see our relationships actually strengthen. And this is what we have talked about before. Our relationships can feel as though they get stronger, and there may be those who also fall away. So just something to be prepared for. And I see Jen is saying in the comments that yes, she's noticed that a few of her relationships are changing. And it's not unusual at all for people who are doing this kind of work regularly. So hopefully some of the relationships are changing in a positive aspect, but it always is good to just be aware of those that don't actually change in a positive way. Lori's asking if shadow work and soul searching are the same thing. Soul searching is a very generic term. I think that shadow work, there's an element of soul searching in shadow work. It really kind of depends on how people define the soul searching. But I do think that they can be put into a similar category. Again, shadow work is getting down into, it's like the technicalities of it are, getting down into that shadow self that we have rejected, whereas soul searching could mean a lot of different things, like trying to find your higher purpose or your given path, connecting to the higher self. Now, all these things, shadow work will help you do too. So in some ways, yeah, we could probably use the words interchangeably, but it is a technicality. I think soul searching probably includes more than just shadow work as a process. Okay, I'm going to talk about tip number 4, but you guys can keep the comments and questions coming. All right, so tip number 4 is pair your shadow work with energy work in order to accelerate the process. So those who are in our Shadow Seekers membership know that it's not just a shadow work membership, it's also an energy work membership. Now this has to do with my belief that where many shadow work programs not fail, but where what they forget about is there's also an energetic component to all the work that needs to be done. So let me explain what I mean by that. Now, shadow work is going to address emotional blockages, but but our energy work is going to address the energetic ones. Now, when we only do shadow work, what we might find is that we leave behind energetic residue, and it can be hard to even notice that residue because some of it has come from a long time ago in childhood, in the teenage years. So let me give an example here. So let's suppose we have a person who is, through their shadow work, they are working on abandonment issues, grief at being abandoned by a caregiver at an early point in life, or a caregiver who, was disappointing or didn't give them what they needed. So their shadow work is going to help them explore all of the emotional component here. It's going to help them explore the emotional blockages like feelings of anger, feelings of grief, feelings of unworthiness, that kind of emotional pain. But we've carried that for so long that we can't really expect for that to not be in the energetic body as well as energetic residue. So briefly, and if you wanted to learn a little bit more about this, you could check out that Introduction to Shadow Work video that I'll have the link below. The bodies, we have multiple bodies. So we think that we're just physical, and most of us here, we all recognize, okay, there's a physical body, there is a spiritual body, we might recognize a mental body, maybe even the emotional body. There's also an energetic body. And all of these bodies are, a good example would be kind of like stacked one inside the other, like a set of Russian nesting dolls. Now, the etheric body, which is our energetic body, and the physical body, they are so deeply entwined. A great analogy is like a sponge. Like if you imagine like your sponge is your body, and you put water, soak it in water so that it's all saturated with that water is your etheric body. So they're really, once the sponge has taken up the water, it's really hard to see where the sponge ended and the water began. That's the reality of the etheric body or the energetic body and the physical one. All right, so because of that, because of the marriage of those two bodies, it's really hard for us to just work on one. And so when we do our shadow work, we want to pair it with the energetic work. So let's go back to the example of the person who was working through the grief of having a caregiver who abandoned them. So this person will do all their shadow work, and they're going to find great relief as they go through, and they release some of that, and they start to integrate parts of the shadow, things that were kind of cut off and rejected when all of this trauma was going on as a child. And then on top of it, they can begin to work with the chakra system. So in this example of the person working through the abandonment issues, they would probably be working with their root chakra, because that has to do with our stability and our security. And that's going to get impacted at an early age if we have issues with caregivers or not feeling like we're secure. And then anyone who has some kind of a grief will want to work with the heart chakra. So that person might also begin to work with the heart chakra. And if they start to work with this energetic body, in addition to the shadow work, they're going to find that they're going to accelerate the healing process. And this also ensures that our energy as a system is flowing optimally, because what we don't want is we don't want a bunch of blockages within the system. So our chakras are never really blocked, but what can happen is that if we have stuck and stagnant energy in areas, it's like a clutching or a holding on because something impacted the chakra at a certain time. What it means is that there's less space for the rest of our Kundalini energy to move through it. And we want that energy to be flowing from the earth into us, up through us, and up through our crown. And as it comes up into our higher energetic centers, this is where we'll have that amplification of our intuition. So what we find is we start to work on energetic blockages that are lower than this upper area. We find that these upper areas begin to open up, even if we've done nothing to work on them themselves. Okay, so let me see. I got another tip here, but hi, Joelle is joining. And Misty said she's been understanding her darker side more through shadow work and how to control it because at her core, she's completely different. Yeah, so this is what a lot of people who do the shadow work start to realize. And she said for the longest time, because of what happened in her life, she's overlooked how it really affected her. And this has taught her a lot about her own psyche. Yeah. So totally somebody who's been doing her shadow work, and you start to see those big changes, how these things that we thought, there are many things that we thought were resolved, we thought maybe we're not being affected by them anymore. And we get in there and we start doing that work, we start to realize, wow, there's actually still some residue left over from that thing. And then it allows us to let go of some of that, start to integrate the shadow, and yeah, helps a lot with, like she said, with her psyche and everything about her. All right, so tip number 5, use the lunar cycle to guide your shadow work. So I've talked about this one before. I think I've given a similar tip before, but because we are literally like less than 48 hours away from the new moon, we're right at the end of the lunar cycle. This is a great time for us to talk about how lunar energy can be used to guide the shadow work process. So the idea here is that not all parts of the lunar cycle are created the same. So during the new moon through the waxing moon into the full moon, this is a great time to do your energetic work. Now, some people may find that they're just called in and they start doing shadow work during that time period too. I'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. But during this time, a lot of people are going to benefit from doing some kind of energetic work. So if you know that there is a chakra that is one that you need to work on, the new moon to the full moon is a great time for you to be doing that kind of work. I call this priming the pump. And what I believe that this does for people is it gets you into a state where you start to move energy. You start to move those blockages that you might not even know were there. And that gets your energy flowing more optimally. And as soon as that energy starts flowing more optimally through these centers, it creates a more receptive space within you. And that is the kind of space that we need for shadow work, because it's really hard. Shadow work isn't something that you can force. So you need a lot of like prompting, you need a lot of openness and space and just being kind of, sometimes you'll go through cycles where not a lot is going on, and then all of a sudden one cycle is just, whoa, that was a lot of shadow work I just processed. But all that stuff you were doing leading up to it, where it felt like not much was going on, you were actually doing work. You were moving energy. You were working on, getting your energy more optimally flowing. You were working on perhaps being more receptive. Maybe you didn't even know it, and then all of a sudden there comes the shadow work one cycle. So when you do your shadow work during that waxing half, or sorry, when you do your energy work during that waxing half of the cycle, what you'll find is you become more receptive to the shadow self, to the unconscious mind, and to your masks that you are wearing. All right, so what happens is that when we get to that full moon and we start to move into the waning half of the cycle, more and more people start to feel like they may be pulled inward. And that inward pull is the invitation to go deeper with your shadow work. So you may find during that time that you'll have aha moments. I call these like the spontaneous shadow work sessions. So all of a sudden, you will have a great amount of information come in that answers questions that perhaps you've been puzzled by for 30 or 40 years sometimes all the way back to childhood. And all of a sudden, you have this insight as though it came from the God or the universe or the sky. But really what it is that you've become so receptive because of the energy around you and the work that you're doing, that all of a sudden you are just so open to receiving that information that you had somehow blocked out before or couldn't see. So this is especially true during the last quarter of every cycle. So those last seven days, you start to feel like perhaps some of you start to feel a little rundown in energy. This is a sign that it's time to see, can you find a way to rest and relax? Because if you go, 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 you're fighting against the energy that your body is naturally wishing for, and that can actually fight against your own shadow work. Now, I know in our modern world, it can be very hard. It's a very go, 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 go world, and we have jobs and children and responsibilities and bills and all kinds of things. But if you can find a space during that last quarter of every cycle, or at least most cycles, where you can actually rest and go into like a contemplative space, you may find more of these spontaneous shadow work sessions. Now, the balsamic moon is the last 72 hours of the cycle. So that would be the last 3 days before we hit the new moon. Now, we entered into that. The new moon is Friday morning, so we would have entered into that yesterday morning, Tuesday. We're recording this on a Wednesday. And that is where we are right now, and that's where people may especially be feeling very receptive. Now, during this time, the work that we are doing may bring us such insight that we realize there are things we can let go of and we can release. Now, of course, you can release anything that's conscious, but sometimes unconscious things all of a sudden come into awareness right now, and you can let those go too. So I always say these last 72 hours of any cycle, great time for you to do some shadow work and or let go of some things. Now, what you also want to consider is paying attention to your own personal energetic cycle as well. So that general cycle of kind of the flow of that waxing energy where we're working on our energy work, and then we get to the full moon, and then we come into that waning half of the cycle where we're really more introspective and ready to let go of things, that may flip-flop for some people. And so some people may find that they're actually more receptive for the shadow work around the full moon. So that's where you would want to do a little bit of work on your own to kind of figure out what is your own personal energetic cycle like. So I've actually had spontaneous shadow work sessions right during a full moon Nesbit. So it's just be open and aware anytime things are coming through to you. But in general, most people are going to find that that last week of any cycle is where they'll be the most receptive, especially those last 72 hours. Okay, and tip number 6, and then I'm going to go in and see if there's any more questions and answer anything that people have. So tip number 6 is use ritual to enhance your shadow work. So as witches, we know the power of ritual, and this can greatly amplify our shadow work. So I just want to tell you a little bit about some of the rituals that I have done and that I lead in the Shadow Seekers membership. It might give you some ideas, inspire you. So you can, I personally love doing a dark moon ritual myself. So even when I'm leading other people, I always do some kind of a dark moon ritual. And so this it's pretty much the same for me every month. I take a piece of paper, I light some candles, I cast a circle, I call my patrons, I sit in the circle for a while and reflect. I get a piece of paper and I write down all the things that I would like to release. And sometimes those are all the same things every month. Sometimes there's different things, there's new things that come up. Sometimes things get let go of and they don't need to be on the list next month. But I do all that. I charge the paper, I raise some energy, and then I burn it as a wish to kind of let go of all that. So there's some kind of a ceremonial way of destroying that paper. So that is a nice example of just like an individual letting go kind of shadow work ritual that you can do. Now, you can also find people who lead shadow work rituals, so like we do in our Shadow Seekers membership. So tomorrow night we're doing a really exciting one. We're working with the goddess Amaterasu. She's the Japanese goddess of the sun, and we have been working with the solar plexus, so we're going to use her energy and have her aid us in really transforming self-doubt into self-belief. And in the past, I've led ritual with the goddess Sagaglalal. She's a Wishram goddess. She's a goddess of the Wishram people. And during that ritual, we were releasing ancestral trauma. Last month, we worked with Kori. She is the maiden form of Persephone before she's stolen by Hades and taken to the underworld. And we were working with our inner child. We've done a ritual with Anana and descending down into the underworld, which is essentially the shadow self anyway. So there's a lot of things that you can do ritually, and especially as witches. And so there's a lot of like shadow work programs out there. There's a lot of people teaching shadow work. But if you are a witch or someone who likes magical practice, consider bringing rituals into your practice, ritualize it. And you can, like we talked earlier, there are stones that you can use, that you can bring in, like obsidian and onyx, labradorite. There's many different stones. There's different oils, like I found, like showing earlier, that oil that I found. You can bring all kinds of things into your ritual, or candles, dark candles, and just really ritualize the experience. And I think as a witch, I think that's just like the icing on the cake, and it just makes the shadow work that much more powerful. So if you are not in our Shadow Seekers membership and would like a taste of this, I am going to be doing a free online ritual next Thursday, 5/25 at 5:30 p.m. Pacific. And this is actually based on one of the first rituals we did in Shadow Seekers. So Shadow Seekers are definitely welcome to come to it as well, because it will be a little different than what we did. But we're going to be working with the goddess Kali and working to release fears and negative energy and negative emotions. So if you'd like a taste of what ritually working with your shadow work feels like, come join us for that ritual, and there will be more information coming in the next week. And before I go into the comments and the questions, I want to let you know as well is that if you are interested in our Shadow Seekers membership, it is reopening at the end of next week. We're going to be open for 1 week, and then we're going to close again, and we're going to take in our next round of members. So this is a great time for anybody to be doing shadow work. So whether you do it with a group or you do it on your own, I just want to let everybody know this is actually a great time to be doing shadow work, because Saturn is in Pisces right now and is about to go retrograde on June 17th. It'll be there until November 4th, and there will still be some space afterwards where we'll be in kind of the shadow aspect of that retrograde. And in fact, I haven't looked up the exact dates now, but it wouldn't surprise me if we've already started to enter the shadow aspect of Saturn going retrograde right now, or right as we speak here. So The thing about Saturn retrograde is it freaks a lot of people out. Honestly, it's nothing to be freaked out about if you are, especially for someone who's a witch and knows how to work with energy and knows how to do shadow work. It may be a tumultuous time for people. The trouble is that Saturn is a taskmaster. He is the one who comes along and teaches us our lessons. But in the dreamy sign of Pisces, this Saturn retrograde takes on a different feel. And so it's really a perfect opportunity for shadow work because it invites us to go inside and actually really figure out what is going on. I think it's actually going to be amplifying a lot of people's shadow work during this time. So of course, like I said, just know that if you're doing your shadow work on your own, but like the best time you could be doing it, June 17th to November 4th. But if you are interested in guidance and community, we have a great one in Shadow Seekers. So we'll be bringing more details soon in case you are interested in joining. All right, so let me see if we've got any questions. So if anybody's got any questions, definitely drop them in the chat now. I'm going through to see if I missed anything here. So Lori said she hasn't noticed her relationships changing yet, but she feels it's coming. Yeah, sometimes it can be a slow process. So that's the other thing to kind of remind ourselves about shadow work is that it's slow. It's not something that we're going to expect to see immediate changes. Sometimes you'll see like a pretty immediate change in certain areas, but it can take some time. But she says that she's been allowing herself to be purposely more authentic and remove her ever-present happy-go-lucky persona. That is exactly that is exactly the shadow work. So that is definitely a mask that many of us wear. Everything's okay. We save face around people, don't show them, our sadness or our darkness. And then she says, so far she's only noticed concerned looks and a few "are you okay" questions from the people closest to her. Yeah, so that's one of the issues is when we have people who are around us, it's interesting that they become concerned, right, when you're actually in a process of bettering yourself. But I think that sometimes has to do with people feeling threatened. I don't even think that most of the time it's conscious. I think unconsciously they get very much threatened when they start to see us making changes that probably unconsciously they wish that they could do as well. But there are also people who are, depending on their belief systems, they get threatened by changes like this. Because it always surprised me that there are certain groups of Christianity, definitely not the one that I was raised in. I was raised Methodist, but I know there's certain groups of Christians who are pretty threatened by psychology even. And I've told this before, but I do not watch the show, the Wife Swap, but there is this episode that I happened to watch because it was about witches. There was a witch who got switched with a family of very devout Christians. And there's this scene in this episode where the father of the Christian family, he starts talking about like all these evil things, and one of the things he lists off is psychology. And that was startling to me as someone with a master's degree in psychology. I was like, why would anyone think psychology was evil? But there is this idea that anything that like digs down deeper into the surface, under the surface, getting down into that area of the unconscious is thought of as evil by some people. So I don't know if that's why you're getting the weird, the concerned looks and the "are you okay?" But just be aware, not everybody understands this kind of work that we're doing. And then Jen said that she's been doing her moon journal. She's realized she's exhausted 2 days before and into the new moon. Yeah, exactly. So sometimes, like I actually have a teacher who I've done womb working with her, and so she comes at this from a perspective of like the menstrual cycle. But I think this actually the analogy is very good for anybody, no matter what their gender is, and no matter whether they have a menstrual cycle or not. There's still an energetic cycle of everybody. So we're basically growing, and then we're releasing, and it's just over and over and over again cyclically. And so one of the things that she said is that these ideas of being like really tired and feeling really worn out, and sometimes people are like really emotional, they feel really bad. They might feel like really bad around this time. it's the body's invitation to please slow down and please turn inward. And it's all that external stuff that's going on around us that is exhausting to us. And so if we kind of can find some space to turn inward, we might feel a little bit better. But like Jen was saying, and it's important thing that she brings up is that you don't really exactly know that unless you track your own personal lunar cycle. And so some people will like her, she seems to be like cycling with the lunar cycle because she's feeling that tiredness and that exhaustion near the new moon, right when it's time to kind of start letting go of things. But other people might notice that right at the first quarter, or might notice that at the full moon. And you don't really know that until you track your own cycle. So definitely worth doing that. I mentioned it before, but I'll say it again for anybody who's newer here. Very easy to track your cycle, your lunar cycle or your energetic cycle. All you have to do is look up the phase of the moon. You can find a moon calendar to do that, and you'll write down the phase that the moon is in, and then just write a couple words about how you feel energetically, emotionally, and physically. And then over a couple of months, you'll start to see some patterns. And those patterns actually might shift and change too. I found for myself that sometimes it's like I feel like that at the full moon, and then sometimes I feel that like that at the new moon. And so it's not always the same, but it seems to be like large chunks of time, and then sometimes it will kind of like flip, and then I'm like on the other side and I'm feeling the energy. I'll feel like very amplified at the new moon and very low at the full moon. But see, again, I wouldn't really know that those patterns unless I was tracking. All right, so if anybody, let me make sure I didn't miss anything here, but anybody who wants to leave any other comments or questions, if I miss anything, I'll go back later and I will make sure I answer everything. So I just want to let you know that coming up next week on Wednesday, 5/24, I'm actually going to be doing the episode a little bit earlier at 4 p.m. Pacific instead of 5:30. So that would be 7 Eastern instead of 8:30. And I'll put that in the group and the invitations and everything. But I'm going to be doing an episode on dreams. We're getting ready to do some dream work in our Shadow Seekers group, and I want to share some tips here in the larger group as well on dream working. And I'm going to the Cure concert later that night. My friend got us tickets, so that's why I will not be here at 5:30 next Wednesday. And then, like I said, Thursday, 5/25, that's the next night at 5:30 p.m. Pacific, we'll be doing that free ritual, Kali, releasing fear and negative energy and emotions. Now, that ritual, you will be able to get a Zoom link for that here if you're a member of Body, Mind, Witchcraft, our larger free online group. Everybody will get an invitation to that, and anyone who is on the Body, Mind, Witchcraft mailing list will also get an invitation to that. So that is going to be an opportunity where you can actually come live on a Zoom with us to do the ritual, but we're also going to feed that out to the Body, Mind, Witchcraft Facebook page for anybody who wants to watch it there, who just wants to watch it as a live, and then it will be fed back into the group as a replay. So if you can't come live, don't worry, there will be replays, lots of places for you to check that ritual out. And then on Wednesday, 5/31, I will also be doing, that's the next Ask Aislin, and I will be doing a special shadow work and energy work Q&A. So I'm going to put a little question up in the group where people can leave all of their questions, a little space for that, and then I will answer as many of them as I can in that space of time. Also, just wanted to mention something a little bit different is I do have a course coming up called Demystifying and Deepening Witchcraft. This is an opportunity to take this course live with me over the summer at a deeply discounted price. So if you're in Shadow Seekers, you get even bigger discount, but even those who are in the main group, you guys will get a discount as well. So I'm just going to be teaching this course live. Eventually we're going to package that up and make it fancy and everything. But if you want to come to this course live with me, there will be an opportunity, and you'll get some information later about that. This is basically based on the teachings and the trainings I do for my own personal coven that we do live, but this is me taking the trainings online and just teaching as much of this as I can to everybody else. So if you are new to the craft, never had any formal training, or just interested in learning more and adding to your current base of knowledge, this might be the course for you, because like I said, we're going to go through everything. Okay. All right, so if there are no more questions, I am going to sign off for tonight. But I really look forward to seeing you guys next week at that ritual with Kali to release our negativity and our fear and our negative emotions. All right, until next time, blessed be.